Well, it's a great pleasure to join you virtually. I'm very sorry to be missing seeing you in person, but I wanted to thank Professor Tom Stepanowicz and Professor Nancy Welsh for the kind invitation to speak about the topic of research and scholarship across borders for the Conference on Appreciating Our Legacy and Engaging Our Future at Pepperdine Law School. So today what I'm going to speak about in the next couple of minutes is research on the governance of dispute resolution institutions across borders through a process of what's described here as devolved reflection. So in terms of the next couple of minutes, we're going to be talking about devolved reflection, as a tool for engaging in dispute resolution organizational development across borders, also as a research approach, as well as a look at a case study or a case example of how devolved reflection might be used in a particular research project. So what is our understanding of devolved reflection from this perspective? It's a model of reflective organizational decision-making and can also be applied within the context of research. And so the question here in the next couple of minutes that we'll be looking at is how might we engage in mixed method research with a view towards advancing our understanding of the performance of systems of dispute resolution using something akin to a method of devolved reflection. So part of what drives this approach is this idea, or this concept that justice is dependent on universal participation. So the idea that the more participants we have involved in sharing their perspectives, their input on the functioning of various systems of dispute resolution, the more informed and the richer understanding we'll have, and the more just and fair those systems will become. So how does this work in organizational context? So devolved reflection in organizational development works through the input and participation of stakeholders who engage in deliberation. They arrive at a greater understanding of existing circumstances first. They review accomplishments, they analyze challenges, and they learn from experience and plan next steps in an effort to improve the overall operation of that organization. So this can be used alone, but it can also be used in the context of a wider process of systematic learning, which will be referenced in the end, but we won't go into too much discussion on that. How do systems advance? What are some of the characteristics of these evolving organizations that use devolved reflection as a research approach? So again, it's based on this idea of a strength-based paradigm, or a appreciative inquiry type approach where you're looking at strengths and trying to build on them. It's also based on peer relationships, so understanding and discussion amongst members of a peer group, trying to understand through collective self-reflection what's working well and what are challenges and how can those be improved and addressed. And this allows an organization or an institution to grow through one topic after another. So this has significant implications for organizational dispute resolution, organizational advancement. It supports cooperative, cohesive, creative social behavior and enhances, in some cases, productivity and collective action for mutual benefit. So the question is, how can we glean insights from this particular approach in the research context when we're looking at the research of dispute resolution institutions across borders? How might a devolved reflective approach assist us in some of the methodologies that we are using in our research on dispute resolution organizations? So now we're going to look briefly at how devolved reflection might serve as a research methodology and an approach to policy refinement. One way of thinking about how organizations of dispute resolution advance is by thinking about what's been understood so far in terms of the process of scientific advancement or scientific revolution, as Thomas Kuhn describes it. And he describes this idea of iterative revolutions in ADR in general, but here it's being applied to thinking in organization in the context of dispute resolution institutions. Organizations develop through experiencing new challenges, asking new questions, and addressing these questions through a collective body of shared knowledge and practice over time. This implies the collective work of groups, organizations, and communities engaged in a joint exploration of knowledge. So, this is an approach which I've tried to draw on to some extent in some of the research, sort of comparative cross-jurisdictional research projects that I've done, looking at dispute resolution systems in a few different cultural and regional contexts. So I won't go into detail on those projects, but just to mention, the first was on looking at resolving disputes across the Asia-Pacific region. That was looking primarily at arbitration practice in East Asia in comparison with some practices in the West. The second project looked at systems of consumer financial dispute resolution, how individuals address their grievance with banking institutions in about 7 different jurisdictions. And the last project is on court mediation reform, so how courts structure mediation, whether voluntary or mandatory, and how that might affect user experience. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the last one and how this process of devolved reflection was used or attempted to be used in that project. So this research engaged in an 83-person survey, so individuals were invited to participate. Also involved case studies of 10 mediation jurisdictions, looking at their court structure and mediation structure within the courts, as well as a time series analysis of civil justice indicators and how those moved over time after the introduction of one of these various approaches to court mediation. And so it explored these comparison between voluntary and mandatory mediation in 10 jurisdictions by looking at the association between judicial mediation structure and perceptions of justice, efficiency, and confidence in courts. So how did it try to integrate some of this devolved reflective approach in the research? So part of it was engagement in conversations with practitioners who are involved directly in the practice within the courts, involving these practitioners also in the design of the questions, testing the questions with some of these individuals to make sure that they are understandable, and then looking specifically in the substance of the question to what practitioners view as the dynamics, including the challenges that they see within their own particular court mediation system, the strengths of that system, as well as the lessons learned and suggestions that they have for improving the system overall. And through that data and through that sort of analysis, sifting through some of this information, the research sought to look at the impact of the program type on perceptions of confidence in the overall judiciary, fairness, and efficiency of the process. Also, because each cultural context is so unique and there's so many moving parts and it's very difficult to compare across regions, time series analysis was done within each of the jurisdictions to look at comparison or change over time after the introduction of one of these court mediation systems to see how it either helped advance or improve conditions within the court or not. And so that was also a way to kind of address the difficulty of cross-jurisdictional comparison through internal analysis. So that was another set of indicators that were looked at over a 5-year time period. So some of the principal finding, and I won't go into the whole sort of research, was that the voluntary mediation programs tended to be associated with a slightly higher proportion of advancement within those jurisdictions of levels of efficiency and perceptions of justice. And then between voluntary and mandatory systems, you saw a nearly equal proportion of advancement over a 5-year time frame in levels of confidence in the system, as well as impartiality and effectiveness. All right, so what do we take away from this? These thoughts. So devolved reflection is an approach both within organizations as well as an approach that might be used within research context to offer a starting point for a mixed method analysis of how we can build on collective knowledge generation and understanding both the current state of our dispute resolution institutions, but also how they might advance or develop over time. And in the context of sort of continued development of this process, it's possible that future work explore how devolved reflection as one component in a larger process of collective study, consultation, action, and reflection, this sort of cyclical process, could yield meaningful and sustained impact. So the limitation of the projects that I do are just that one-shot sort of reflective process. But what would be interesting, and I'd encourage those who are interested to see how this might work in other projects, is to see how this might be part of a sort of iterative cyclical process of going back to these same communities, sharing back the research and seeing how through reflection on any adjustments made to these particular institutions, how that might lead to more sustained, meaningful impact. So I'll leave it at that. I do hope that you can stay in touch, and if you'd like to discuss any of this or share your thoughts, please email me, and this is my email, sali@hku.hk. And again, pleasure to be there virtually, and I hope that I can join next time in person. Thank you so much.